Well, good afternoon. It's afternoon now. Our next reader is Roger Jones. He's a historian of science who flies powered aircraft and gliders. In addition to academic writing, he has published 2 short stories in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine and nonfiction pieces in several flying magazines. In addition to Victor T. Vulture, he has written a monograph on the founder of hydrodynamics, a textbook on its history, 3 flying-involved novels, and a memoir. So if we could please give Roger Jones a warm welcome up.
Thanks for that intro. Makes me feel illustrious. As Monty Python often said, and now for something completely different. This, I'm a flyer. I really care about flying, and if you care about flying, you've got to be impressed by buzzards. Or turkey vultures, which is what you need to say after this moment. They're not buzzards, there are turkey vultures, and therefore you will be unambiguously referring to the guys who are the best soaring birds that any of us will ever see. They're not the fastest or cover the most ground or the most lethal, but in terms of energy expended per unit time, they're the best soaring birds that we will ever see. This is attractive to pilots who are paying $6 a gallon for gasoline. Buzzards, turkey vultures, are up in every kind of weather, working hardly at all, but spiraling around over your head. They don't flap. You just watch a turkey vulture in the sky and he will go for hours without flapping. As a pilot, I deeply envy this, except for the diet. I don't envy turkey vultures the diet. The reason that they're up flying around in the way that they do is because they're looking for food. And we know what food that is. Its precious name is carrion, but it's dead meat. Turkey vultures only eat dead meat. They eat no live meat. And what they are doing ecologically is out cleaning up the world of dead meat. As a pilot who envies turkey buzzards, except for their diet, I imagined what it would be like to be a turkey vulture that wasn't crazy about dead meat. A vegetarian buzzard. Or at least a buzzard who liked vegetables. So that's the origin of this little novella. 50 years ago now, an author named Richard Bach wrote the most popular book about misunderstood birds ever, called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And if you've never read Jonathan Livingston Seagull, you ought to. It's in the library. It's no bigger than this. It's a little book with out-of-focus pictures of seagulls in it, and it's about a seagull who achieves transcendence. My buzzard does not achieve transcendence, but he comes to love vegetables. So that's the origin of this little book. I'm going to read 2 passages from the book that are vegetable intensive. But you need to know sort of the story. So Victor T. Vulture, all turkey vultures have middle initial T. This is a scientific fact, and it is to distinguish them from black vultures, which have middle initial B. A black vulture is smaller than a turkey vulture and is more aggressive. Let's see, what else do I want to say before I read? Well, nothing. So Victor T. Vulture and his brother Charles were conceived and hatched and lived their early days in a barn loft, which is true of many vultures. They liked barn lofts as places to grow up, but their parents disappeared, and they were taken over by their aunt Viola T. Vulture, who taught them what vultures needed to know and fed them. That's important. She fed them. We won't describe in great detail exactly how that worked. But among the things that she taught them was how to use their incredibly sensitive noses. The turkey vulture has the best nose among all birds and among all vultures. That's how they find dead meat, is by its odor. And they can sniff dead meat 2 miles in the sky. They have the second best eyes of any bird. The best eyes are possessed by hawks and eagles, but a turkey vulture's eye is only a little bit worse than that. So the typical behavior of a turkey vulture is to fly around in a circle, searching for odor, and then having found the odor to descend low enough to where they can see where the odor is coming from. And then, if it's appropriate, get ready for dinner. So, that's what turkey vultures do for a living, except for Victor T. And Victor T. has an epiphany. And I'm going to read the epiphany passage to you. The truth was, Victor was not excited about meat. It wasn't that he didn't like it. It was just that he didn't like it as well as he liked other things to eat. His first inkling of this had come even before he had fledged last summer, when Aunt Viola was feeding him and Charles in the barn loft. Aunt Viola had regurgitated a lovely meal of rabbit for them. And just at the last, a bit of something different, a vegetable, pumpkin, she called it. Victor had liked the taste a lot, though Charles hadn't. That was Victor's first taste. The second had come by accident in the fall, just a few months after he had fledged. It was on one of his early long solo flights. Aunt Viola had sent him over from Roost Hill to fly with his second cousins along the Palisades. "It's a good day for the ridge," she had said, after an early morning rise to check the wind. "Those palisaders will be flying up and down as long as it keeps blowing like this. Fast, choppy flying is something you need to practice, and you can't get lost going over there by yourself. It's only 20 miles. You can see the cliffs from here. Go on off now before you get hungry again, and don't forget to nod at your Aunt Gertrude if you see her." Well, he had gotten hungry on the way over. Flying over a brown field, he had picked up just a whiff of something, and it reminded him that he was hungry, or it made him hungry. He couldn't be sure which. The odor was not full at his altitude, but it had an appealing, tangy quality. He thought maybe he would spiral down and just locate where the sign was coming from. That was something he needed to practice too. He knew Aunt Viola wouldn't want him going to Earth all by himself. But he didn't have to go all the way down, just lower. Then maybe he could actually see the food. That was something he needed to practice too. By the time he'd gotten low, he was confused. He surely should have been able to pinpoint the sign. It had become a very full odor, full of hints he had never encountered in meat before. But instead of being focused, the sign had spread out, stronger here, weaker there, as he circled. He hadn't known where to look for the source. It was easy to see that the field was dotted with orange vegetables of some kind, but he could see no meat anywhere. Still, the odor had been a very nice odor. The tangy quality was very strong, and he had been very hungry by then. He'd known Aunt Viola would not have been happy, but he settled down to look, folding his wings carefully as she had taught him to do when in a strange place. The sign had been all around him. He'd turned this way and that and finally followed his nose in a direction the sign was strongest. He hadn't had far to go. In 6 hops, he was standing before one of the orange vegetables, a big round thing. The odor coming from it was almost overwhelming, particularly from one side that was caved in. He had looked around to be sure nothing was sneaking up on him, then inserted his head into the cavity. The odor had been absolutely intoxicating. Could a vegetable in a field be good to eat? Nothing he had learned about food on patrols or on picnics had involved vegetables. Still, the odor here was wonderful, so he had bitten off a piece from the edge of the cavity, just a little piece, slightly black on the inside. He crushed it in his beak, and the taste of the pumpkin Aunt Viola had regurgitated that morning in the barn loft came rushing back to him. This was pumpkin. Aunt Viola had told him over and over, "Let your nose be your guide." Well, he had. He had eaten the whole side out of that pumpkin right then and there. After that, he'd hopped around the field looking at other pumpkins. The ones that smelled the best were the ones most caved in, he had found. The blackness around the edges was a good indicator. He'd sampled several. What a discovery! A whole field of good food without a single competitor. Not even a raccoon showed up to see what he'd found, and they seemed to come right out of the ground whenever there was normal meat to be had. He was not hungry at all when he took off, and had to run a few extra hops to get airborne. So this is one young teenage buzzard, turkey vulture, who has discovered meat. But what happens when one teenager finds something cool? Other teenagers want in on it. So I'm going to read you a scene in which more teenagers discover pumpkins. Pumpkin, by the way, is Buzzard's favorite vegetable. It's a matter of fact. But it has to be rotten. Yeah. Okay. The very next day, shortly after, so his one friend discovers what he's doing. 2 minutes? Well, I don't have time to read this whole scene. Let's see what I can do.
You have 5 minutes because we're in a delay.
5 minutes? Okay, I probably do have 5 minutes. The very next day, shortly after Victor had dropped into a field filled with oblong yellow vegetables, he was startled by 3 gliding shadows. He didn't have to look up to know what to expect. Crawford and friends. Sure enough, after 3 flopping landings, he heard Crawford's "What's down, Buzz?" called out. You don't say "What's up" if you're a buzzard. It's "What's down?" "What's down, Buzz?" called out over the field. When the 3 had hopped closer, Victor recognized Samantha and Ginger from the roost. First cousins of Crawford's, or some order of his too. Samantha's head was distinctively true red, and she carried it high out of her feather collar. Victor was annoyed. He tried to stay low in soaring to the field, particularly so no one would see him. It was annoying that Crawford had been keeping track of him, and doubly annoying that he'd talked to and brought company. It was so hard to hide in the air from other vultures. They could all see so darn far. "What's on the menu today, Buzz?" said Crawford cheerfully. Samantha and Ginger cocked their heads at him. "Well, since you're here," said Victor, emphasizing the "here" to show his annoyance, "you can see the offering right up close and decide for yourself." He swiveled his head to take in the field. "What are we looking for?" said Samantha. "There's some weird smells in this field, but I don't see any meat." Crawford grunted a chuckle and hopped 2 steps. "I only told him you were extending your diet, like you said, not in what direction." Victor was even more annoyed than he'd been before. Crawford really was a buzzard, almost as bad as a bee buzzard. Well, not quite that bad. Still, Victor would state his case. They could take it or leave it. "This is a field of vegetables," he said, his head up. "I have discovered, cousins, that vegetables are good to eat, and no one else eats them. Not bee vultures, not coyotes, not raccoons or possums, not even crows, at least not any I've seen, so I get to eat my fill." "You can say that again," said Ginger. "I've noticed." Samantha gave a conspiratorial hiss. Victor was embarrassed, but he didn't know what to say, so he just continued. "There is a certain state of a vegetable that is prime for eating. The skin becomes soft. Brown or black spots are a good indicator, but not too black, or they will be pulpy. Among the vegetables in this field," he swiveled his head, "you may notice that some are prime. If you want to try some, and Crawford seems to think that you will, or he wouldn't have brought you," he fixed Crawford with a glare, "go right ahead." One little paragraph. "Show me one that's prime," said Samantha. Victor sniffed, looked around, and hopped along the row till they were standing next to a group of 3 oblong yellow vegetables that all had large brown spots. He bent his head down and bit off the small end of one, beaked it twice, and swallowed. "Not bad, I would say, but everybody's taste is different. I can't predict at all what you might like." He glanced again at Crawford. Samantha sniffed at the collection of vegetables, looked at Victor, and bit the other end off the one he had nibbled. She lifted her head and beaked it several times. Juice ran down her lower mandible. "Worth another try," she said, and bit off another piece. Ginger took hold of the vegetable beside it, dragged it off a step, and bit off its end too. "Not exactly rabbit," she said. "You don't have to give up rabbit," said Crawford. "It's just something new, a novelty like. I told you Victor was eating something interesting." Crawford bit the 3rd vegetable in the group in half. "It is interesting, I'll give you that." So I'll just say that this book was endorsed by Bill Lynch, who's the Kentucky State wildlife biologist, turkey vulture behaviorist. If you got vultures in your barn and you need to do something about them, which you can't do by yourself because they're a protected species, you've got to call Bill Lynch, and he will come and deal with your vulture problem. So he is my fact checker for this book and all the details about buzzard behavior, except the language we don't know what they're saying, is true. So if you want a textbook of buzzard behavior, there you go.
Thank you. Let's give a round of applause for Roger.